Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a discussion with respect to the status of youth in India, the challenges being faced by them, and the way forward to addressing those challenges. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the Constitutional Office of the Governor, its importance, and the rising controversies. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2025, along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Now, coming to the very first article of the day, this is with respect to empowering India's youth. So yesterday we celebrated the National Youth Day. Now this is celebrated to commemorate the birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda. Now Swami Vivekananda always emphasized upon the importance of empowering the youth, so that they can become as an effective harbinger of social transformation. And it is in this light that the Prime Minister of the country has also emphasized upon this aspect and said that the youth should step out of the comfort zone. And he has said that youth would play a very important role as the country is on a course to become the 10 trillion economy by the end of the next decade. He also has emphasized the importance of the political participation and has said that ultimately it is the youth of India in which the future of country lies, right? So this is the overall aspect. But see, again, understand that in India, the youth have a lot of challenges, right? So we'll discuss in detail what are the different challenges being faced by the youth and what can be the way forward. Now, this is a very important topic, primarily because it is a part of GS1, the population aspect, right? As we are witnessing the demographic transition. Second is the GS2, social sector. It includes health, education, skills. Third, it is very important for the essay. So the content which we would be discussing today can be really helpful for your essay preparation. Now let's start. Let's first define what do we mean by youth. See, to be very frank, there is no universally agreed definition of the word youth, right? Different organizations have their different connotations. Just look at this. For example, the United Nations Secretariat or the UNESCO or the International Labour Organization basically terms the people in the age bracket of 15 to 24 as the youth. Then we have UN Habitat, which says 15 to 32. Then we have UNICEF, WHO, which says young people as 10 to 24. Then we have UNICEF, which has different age brackets. So that is what we are trying to say, that there is no universal agreed definition. But according to the National Youth Policy of India, which was released in the year 2014, the government of India basically defines youth as the people between the age group of 15 and 29 years. So do remember. Now, if you look at the composition of the youth in the country, what you would understand is that India has one of the largest proportions of the youth in the world, right? It has one of the largest populations of the youth. And according to a data which was given by a report of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, it said that as a proportion of the total population, the youth in the country in the year 2021 were 27.2%, right? And this basically corresponds to a number of around 37 crores, right? 370 million. And it also talked about this fact that the number is going to decline and it would decline to almost 22.7% by 2036. Now, as of now, India's median age, according to the United Nations Population Fund Agency, it is 28.4 years. Do remember, right? Now, this median age is going to increase to almost 31 years by 2030. But still, if you compare it with other countries, be it China or be it USA, it would be far lower, right? For China, it would be 42 years. For US, it would be 40 years, right? Now, if you look at the kind of transitions which India has witnessed in the proportion of the youth population, what you would see is that it was primarily the year of 2011, where we witnessed the peak of the youth population, right? But for some states like Kerala, this year was 1991. Now you would ask why. We'll also have a very important discussion today with respect to the news which has come in the Hindu, which talks about the increasing number of maternal mortality rates in Kerala, right? Now the reason here that why Kerala witnessed a peak in 1991 and the other states primarily in 2011 was that because Kerala invested a lot in the family planning measures. So the fertility rates reduced in Kerala, right? Now, thereafter, we have witnessed a decline in the number of youth. But still, remember that even after the decline, India would have substantial number of youths in the country. Now, what is the contribution of youth in the overall development paradigm of the country? The very first is economic contribution. See, if you talk about the overall GDP of the country, which is almost 3.75 US trillion dollars, youth have a significant contribution in the overall GDP, right? And again, understand that the kind of startup ecosystem which we are witnessing as of now, it is dominated by the youths. So also according to a data given by the Department of Industry and Internal Trade, Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, DPIIT, it says that India has more than 80,000 startups, registered startups in the year 2023. Now, again, the labor force participation rate, the data provided by the Periodic Labor Force Survey of 21-22 says that the participation rate is almost 44.4%, right? Next is what have been their contribution in the social transformation. See, if we talk about the kind of transformations which we have witnessed in different sectors, be it healthcare, education, or skills, youth have played a very important role. They have been actively engaged in this aspect, be it the Digital India mission, or be it the Swachh Bharat mission, or be it the actions with respect to the mitigation and adaptation with respect to the climate change. So youth have been at the forefront. And next is innovation. So if you talk about innovation, see, it is a youth of the country which is actually working a lot upon the emerging technologies. For example, artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? And again, there are certain specific sectors, be it the renewable energy, if you talk about the battery storage systems, right? Again, these innovations have been applied in different sectors, the big sectors, for example, the edtech, right? It is through the edtech that people are able to, receive and get so much of information as we are witnessing now, right? So next aspect is the healthcare. So again, what we are trying to say is that there have been a lot of innovations, and primarily these innovations have been carried out by the youth. Now, still what you see is that there are a lot of issues and challenges faced by youth in the country. The very first is unemployment and underemployment. Now, please understand that according to the Periodic Labor Force Survey data of 21-22, it says that the youth unemployment rate in the country was 12.9%, substantially high, right? So what we are trying to say is a big section of the youth still faces unemployment. Next aspect is underemployment. Now, what do we mean by underemployment? See, it means a situation where the skills are not being used properly, used effectively. And ultimately, we are not actually capitalizing upon the potential of the individual. And ultimately, that individual is getting paid lesser, right? So that is what underemployment means. Again, in India, these youths, majority of these youths are employed in the informal sector. Now, the informal sector is characterized by a situation where you have a lack of job security, right? You can be terminated at any point of time. There is no social security, minimal social security, right? The wages are quite less. So again, it's a very tough situation. Also, the India Skills Report of 2023 says that 75% of the youth of the country, they are basically underemployed or employed in those sectors which require no skills, right? So again, in this particular article, we'll have a discussion with respect to lot data, right? I have specifically given these data so that you can quote these data in your answers, right? Next is education and skill gap. See, when we talk about the education aspect, what we see is that the quality of the education in the country is not up to the mark. Also, we have annual status of education report, which is released by the non-governmental organization Pratham. It says that almost 30% of the individuals from the age of 14 to 18 years in this bracket, they basically don't have the basic arithmetic skills. They don't have the basic reading abilities, right? So this points towards the grim situation. Next aspect is the skill mismatch. See, what we are trying to say is the kind of quality of the education which is being provided in the institutes, that is not basically in sync with the requirements of the industry. There is mismatch, right? So again, we are focusing upon the theoretical aspect. We are not focusing upon the vocational aspect, the industry relevant skills. That is what we talk about. So also according to the National Skill Development Corporation, it says that only 25% of the workforce in the country is skilled and the rest is unskilled. Next is, there is a lot of digital divide. See, many of the opportunities which we are witnessing in the country, they are on the e-commerce platforms. But many of these people, the youth, they are not that much digitally literate, right? Also, we have the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India's data of 2023, which says that 50% of the rural youth, they basically lack digital resources, be it the smartphones, be it the high-speed internet. And this, if you compare with the urban areas, it is almost 80%. So 80% of the youth in the urban areas, they have access to these resources. but almost 50%, they don't have access to this. Next is, as I said, there's lack of these smartphones and high-speed internet, right? Next aspect is the mental health and well-being. See, this is a very grave concern which the youth of the country at present are facing. The very first is we have the mental health issues. So we have the National Mental Health Survey of 15-16, which says that almost 7.3% of the youth in the country, they are actually suffering from these depression issues, anxiety issues, stress issues. And this we are talking about in terms of severe issues, right? We're not talking about the normal depression or normal anxiety issues. Next is that, again, the kind of environment which we are witnessing is actually quite strainful for the youths. For example, we have a lot of societal and peer pressure, right? There is increasing instances of complex which the youth is developing, right? So they have complexities, inferiority complex which is being developed. Next is the pressure with respect to the career, the profession. So their aspirations are quite high. Next is the increasing instances of consumerism in the society, right? So they are more into the social media. Their real life are quite different, but the kind of life which they portray on the internet through the social media, it's very different. And that ultimately leads to the development of these mental health issues. Next is there has been increasing instances of increased substance abuse, be it the drugs, be it the alcohol, be it the smoking activities, right? Also, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has talked about the increasing suicide rates in the country. And what you must remember is that this trend is associated more with the adolescent girls, right? Which is a serious issue. Next is the gender inequality aspect. See, when we talk about the youth in the country, we have low female labor force participation rate, and that stands to be just 21.4%. Now, this highlights the gender disparity in the job market, right? Adequate facilities are not being provided to women in the job sector. Next is social norms. Please understand that the kind of social setup, the mindset which we have in most of the places even today, that is quite entrenched, that is quite patriarchal, and that in many occasions leads to early marriages or gender biases. So that is something which affects the overall education and ultimately the empowerment of youth, especially the girls. Next is low participation in STEM. When we are talking about the girls, what we see is that their participation in science, technology, engineering and mathematics domain is quite less as compared to the males. Next is political and civic engagement. See, as Prime Minister Modi has emphasized that there has to be an increasing participation of youth in the civic and political realms, right? But that we are not witnessing. Youth participation in the voting is quite low. Also, the data provided by the Election Commission of India says that almost 30 to 35% of the youths in the age bracket of 18 to 29%, they don't cast their vote, primarily because they have distrust in the political system, or they have no awareness with respect to the political system, or because of the general apathy towards the system. Next is limited representation in the governance aspect. See, definitely the number of youths, especially at the grassroots level, if you talk about the panchayats or the urban local bodies, that has increased. But still, if we talk about at places of high policy making bodies, still their participation is quite less. And this ultimately leads to a situation where the kind of aspirations which youth have, it is not manifested, it is not reflected in the policy aspect. Now, what should be the way forward to address these issues and challenges? See, in this particular part, I have tried to incorporate the kind of initiatives and the policies which the government has for the youth, right? Now, the very first is skill development and education reforms. Now here, what is needed is a comprehensive curriculum reform, education reform, so that the kind of education which we are trying to give to the youth, that is more in line with the industry standards, more in line with the needs of the job market, right? Also, we have to emphasize, since we are witnessing the industrial evolution 4.0, right? Do remember these terms. That should be incorporated into the overall curriculum aspect. That is, we have to focus upon the science, technology, engineering and mathematics domain, STEM domain. Next is we have to focus upon the vocational education, very important, and skill development. This has also been highlighted in the national education policy, new education policy. So do remember. Why we are trying to say is because we don't want that the education should just remain to the theoretical aspect. It should also incorporate the practical skills. So we have the programs like Skill India or Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Now these schemes need to be strengthened, made more broad, right? Also, we have to make sure that there are employable skills in the high demand sectors. What are these high demand sectors? Be it the information technology, be it the healthcare, or be it the kind of transitions we are witnessing in the renewable energy, right? So that is the kind of thing you have to incorporate. Next is that we have to focus upon the higher education expansion. See, as of now, the gross enrollment rate stands to be 27.3% according to the All India Survey of Higher Education 2021. Now, we have basically made a target that we are going to increase this to 50% by 2035, according to the Education Policy 2020. Again, what we are trying to say is that there has to be adequate incentives for the youth to come and pursue higher education. Next is digital literacy programs. Now, we need to focus upon those programs specifically in the rural areas. See, we already have Pradhan Mantri Gramin Digital Saksharta Abhiyan, PMG Disha. But again, we have to make sure that there is adequate and robust implementation of these programs in place, right? We need to strengthen the Bharat Net project, which basically emphasizes upon facilitating the provision of high-speed internet, right? Next is that we have to focus upon promoting employment and entrepreneurship. Very important. So we already have some of the very important programs, be it the Startup India Mission or the Stand Up India Mission, which basically focus upon the women, the SCs, the STs, right? And the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, what we need to do is we don't need to come up with new programs. We just need to make these programs more broad-based so that we can increase the funding, we can give the adequate mentorship support, we can provide the incubation centers. We just discussed a few days back that these incubation centers are the hubs of startup ecosystem in the country. So we have to focus upon that. Next is we should give adequate importance to the public-private partnership. See, again, as I have emphasized even earlier, that the government cannot do everything on its own. The private sector needs to come on board, collaborate with the government, and then come up with new policies. So, for example, we can have different apprenticeship programs, or we can have the on-the-job trainings, very important, right? Recently, the government has also come up with a program internship schemes. So that is a very good step. Next is we need to incentivize the employment. What we are trying to say is that we have a very good scheme, which is Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Protsahan Yojana. Now, in this particular scheme, what the government is trying to do is it is trying to subsidize the contributions made by the employer to the social security of the employee, right? So such schemes need to be enhanced. We need to make sure that the government also subsidizes in various sectors this contribution which is actually made by the employers. So the employers would be in a condition to recruit more people, right? Next is social security, especially of the gig workers. We have talked about the gig workers in detail. What we are trying to say is that majority of these gig workers, they are youths, right? And the kind of environment they have, the kind of job market they're working in is quite tough and provides minimal social security. So we should focus upon that. Next is we need to give importance to improving the mental health and well-being. Now, we have different programs. For example, we have the National Mental Health Care Program. So it is actually focusing upon reducing the stress, the anxiety of the youths, right? So we also have basically telecommunications program where the youth can basically teleconnect with the consultants, and then those counselors can provide them relief to the youths who are actually suffering from these anxiety disorders, right? So we need to focus upon them. Next aspect is ending the substance abuse. So how we can do that? We can come up with programs, the school-based programs, which emphasize upon the harmful effects of the substance abuse. Or we can come up with new rehabilitation centers for those youths who have already suffered because of these substance abuse. Next is bridging the gender divide, very important. See, what we're trying to say is that we should focus upon, as we just discussed in the challenges, we should focus upon the STEM for women so that this domain can be made more accessible and attractive. How we can do that? By providing them scholarships, by providing them the appropriate mentorship, right? So through that, we can increase their participation in the STEM domain. Next is we have to emphasize upon the female entrepreneurship. Now, you must know that there have been a lot of self-help groups, especially the women-led self-help groups who have come with new programs. So that has to be incentivized, very important. We have to give them adequate seed funding. We have to basically incubate their businesses so that they can be helped in the very formative phase, and then they can be provided adequate resources. Next is policy reforms. We need to focus upon this aspect of equal pay, making sure that there is no harassment at the workplace, right? Next is enhancing the civic and political engagement. Very important. What we're trying to say is that the youth should be made more knowledgeable. They should be given proper education with respect to the kind of political rights they have and the political duties they have, right? So there can be the establishment of youth councils and programs. For example, we have this concept of youth parliament and youth advisory committees. Now, through these platforms, their participation into the overall civic domain can be increased. Next is voter education and engagement. See, we have a very important program by the Election Commission of India, which is systematic voter education and electoral participation. This has to be utilized to enhance the youth participation in the overall electoral process. So these are the things which have to be implemented. Again, what we are trying to say is that definitely India has worked upon a lot upon its youth. We have different programs and policies, but still there are a lot of challenges, be it the gender divide, be it the employment or underemployment, be it the issues related to the mental health issues. So we have to incorporate these things. We have to incorporate these things so as to make sure that we can capitalize upon the demographic advantage which India is aspiring for, and make sure that youth basically contribute to a lot in the overall development of the country. This is what you have to understand with respect to this article. Let's go to a mains practice question. The question says, India has one of the largest youth populations in the world, presenting both an opportunity and a challenge for the nation's socio-economic development. In this context, discuss the current status of youth in India and the challenges they face. What steps should be taken to ensure that the youth contribute meaningfully to the nation's growth? So do write a particular answer in this question, 15 marks, 250 words. And if this initiative is really helping you getting the enriched content, do let us know through your likes and comments. Now coming to the second article, this is with respect to the office of the governor, whether he is a guardian of the federalism or a mere puppet. See, there have been increasing instances of tug and war between the governor on one side and the elected state government. Now this has been witnessed in many of the states, primarily the opposition-ruled states. And this time we have a particular statement which was made by the Chief Minister in the Legislative Assembly, and in a reaction to that statement, the Raj Bhavan has basically said that it basically corresponds to the arrogance of the Chief Minister. So this is a very grim situation. Again, please understand that this office is very important so as to facilitate an effective governance, right? Facilitate the interaction between the center and the states. So we'll talk about the office of the governor, the challenges, and what can be the way forward. Now, this is a part of GS2, constitutional posts, powers, functions, and responsibilities. Now, if you talk about this particular office, the office of the governor, what you must understand at the very first place is that it is the constitutional head of a state. A governor is a constitutional head of a state. And what the work of the governor is to facilitate the interactions between the center and the state. It acts as a link, an effective link between the state government and the union government. Again, what you need to understand is that when we talk about the office of the governor, it has a very important place in the overall federal aspect. That is, it facilitates the principles of federalism. It basically makes sure that the interests of states are not compromised. Adequate emphasis is placed on the interests of the states, the concerns of the state. Next is, it also makes sure, the office of the governor makes sure that whatever the functions and duties of the state are, they are actually being followed under a proper constitutional mandate, right? Within the boundaries of the constitution. Next is, if you talk about the origin and features, what you need to understand is that this particular office, it is neither elected directly nor indirectly, right? It is basically a central nominee who is appointed by the President of India, right, on the advice of the Council of Ministers. Now, if you go into the origin of this particular office, you can have the Government of India Act of 1935, which talked about it. Next, we had the 7th Constitutional Amendment Act, which basically said that a particular person can be appointed as a governor of one or more states, right? Now, one very important case which needs to be highlighted here is the Hargobind Pant case of 1979. Now, it was in this case that the Supreme Court very clearly said that the office of the governor is of independent constitutional office. That is, it is not an employment under the center. It has its own independent constitutional existence, right? And it is not an office which is subordinate to the union government. So you need to basically understand this. Now, if you look at the constitutional articles which are related to the office of the governor, we have Article 153, which talks about the office of the governor. Next, we have Article 154, which talks about the executive part of the state to be vested in the office of the governor. Then we have Article 155, which talks about the appointment of the governor by the President of India. Then we have Article 156, which says that the governor shall hold the office for a term of 5 years, subject to the pleasure of the President. Please understand, this is a very important line. Always remember, subject to the pleasure of the President. Article 161, which talks about the power of the governors to grant pardons, reprieves, or commute sentences for those offenses which are against the state laws, right? Next is Article 163, talks about that the governor acts on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, which basically signify or imply the functioning of parliamentary form of government at the state level. Next is, what are the executive power? So it is the governor who appoints the Council of Ministers, including the Chief Minister. and based on the majority in the Legislative Assembly, right? Next is he appoints the Advocate General and the members of the State Public Service Commission. Next, he has the power to recommend to the President's rule under Article 356. If you talk about the legislative powers, he summons and prorogues the state legislature and can dissolve the Legislative Assembly, addresses the state legislature at the commencement of the first session of each year, can withhold the assent to a bill, send it to the President's consideration, or return it in case of non-money bills, right, for the reconsideration. What are the judicial powers? As we discussed, he can grant pardons, reprieves, respites, remission of punishment for those offences which are against the state laws, where the executive power of the state extends. What are the discretionary powers? Always remember that the ambit of the discretionary powers of governor is more than that of the president, right? Acts at discretion in cases like reserving the bills for presidential assent, appointment of chief minister in a hung assembly where no party secures absolute majority, and recommendation of President's rule under Article 356. Now, what are the challenges with respect to the office of the governor? The very first is the appointment process. See, understand that we have the governor who are actually appointed by the president on the advice of the central government. Now, this raises very important questions. Most of the appointments which we witness in the case of governor, they are based on political considerations, rather based on administrative efficiency. Ideally, you should appoint a person who has good knowledge about the administration, who has all the rationality, right? Who tries to facilitate the interaction between the center and the states. But what is happening is that these people, the kind of people who are being appointed to such positions, are those who basically act as the agent of the center, right? They lack political neutrality and impartiality. Again, they're appointed by the ruling party at the center, and they can be removed and transferred on the whims and fancies of the central government. What we are trying to say is that, see, the office of the governor, it is a very highly constitutionally important office, right? The head of a state in constitutional terms. But if you arbitrarily remove or transfer these governors, that is something which goes against the very principles of the constitution, right? And see, again, we need to understand that such kind of activities, the arbitrary removal or transfer of these governors, it basically undermines the dignity of this particular office. Next is the role and powers of the governor. See, the governor in a particular state, he has a lot of powers, a lot of functions, right? So various roles and powers are entrusted to the office of the governor, be it giving assent to the bills, or appointing the council of ministers, including the chief minister, or sending reports to the president, which actually talks about the overall administrative functioning of the state, right? And exercising these special responsibilities. Now, what are these special responsibilities? Be it the 5th schedule areas, the 6th schedule areas, or the other states, right? So the governor has special responsibilities in these areas, subject to the discretion. Now, in many of these cases, it is the discretion of the governor which plays a very important role. Now, this has led to a condition where a lot of conflicts have come, right? There have been instances where the governors have delayed or withheld assent to the bills. See, please understand that once you have a state legislature which has duly passed a particular bill, that should be given assented by the governor. But in many cases, for example, in Kerala or in Tamil Nadu, what we found was that the governor took no action. Just he put a hold on the bill. Now, this is something which goes against the very principle of democracy, because you have elected form of the government at the state level, and that has passed a particular bill. So ideally, the governor, until unless it basically infringes upon the constitutional aspect, he should basically give the assent to bill. Now, there have been instances where the governor has dismissed or dissolved the state governments arbitrarily on the directives of the center. Next is, these actions are criticized as arbitrary, partisan, and unconstitutional. Next aspect is the accountability and immunity of the governors. See, initially what was thought was that the governor would act as the president's analog at the state level. But in reality, what we have actually found is that he has been acting as an agent of the union government. And primarily, the objective was to facilitate the interaction between the union and the states. But now what the work he is doing is constraining the effective governance at the state level, or doing what is being said by the central government, right? Next aspect is that this particular office, the office of the governor can be removed from the office at the pleasure of the union government. Now, this is something which is really concerning, because see, if a particular person who is appointed as a governor has been asked by the center to do something, and if the person doesn't do that, obviously the person can be transferred or removed at the whims and fancies of the center. Now, this goes against the very principles of the constitution. Next is that he is not even answerable to the courts. He has legal immunity when we talk about Article 361, right? So these are the various concerns which are associated with the functioning of the office of the governor. Also, one thing which comes to my mind, which we'll also discuss today, is the case of the appointment of the vice chancellors, right? We'll talk about that with respect to the state university. What reform measures can be taken? The very first is judicial intervention. See, time and again, Supreme Court has basically come and intervened in this aspect and made sure that the governor functions the duties which are assigned by the constitution and does not work according to the whims and fancies of the center, right? So again, what we have to make sure is that the Supreme Court should continue to monitor the conduct of these governors and issue directions whenever necessary. Now, this would help prevent the arbitrary or partisan actions which are in many cases done by the governors, and also make sure that the federal principle is basically upheld. Please understand that when we talk about these states in the country, they have quite a large responsibility in the overall socio-economic transformation of the country. The majority of the expenditure being borne in the overall socio-economic setup is borne by the states. More than 60%, it is actually borne by the states. So they have a huge responsibility in making sure that adequate transformations take place in the socio-economic aspect. So the functioning of the state government should not be stopped or should not be affected by the governor. Next is reform the current appointment and removal process. See, what we are trying to say is that the constitution should be amended and there has to be a proper appointment process and removal process. What we are trying to focus upon is that there has to be a more transparent and consultative mechanism for the appointment and removal of the governor. It should not be based upon the sole discretion of the union government. Next is the removal of the governors can be made more difficult. That is, let's say if the union government wants to remove a particular governor, there has to be a particular resolution which has to be passed by the state legislature. Only then the governor can be removed. Next is, we can basically grant him a precedent-like status. See, again, what we are trying to say is that we have the precedent, right? Now, there's a process of removal of the president through the impeachment, right? The same thing can be emulated at the state level also, so that the governor becomes accountable to the state legislature, right? So make the governor more accountable to the state legislature through the election and the impeachment. The accountability and the legitimacy of the office can be enhanced, and we can actually reduce the scope of interference or arbitrary decisions by the governor through this aspect. Second thing is the election of the governor. See, we can have a scenario where you are actually appointing the governor based on the elections. That is, even we can go for the indirect elections where the member of legislative assembly, basically they choose the governor, right? By the state legislature or by the people of the state. Next is make him or her impeachable. So the governor can be made impeachable by the state legislature on the grounds of violation of the constitution or misconduct. See, if we'll do this, obviously, the governor would be in a position to act in a fair and neutral manner, right? He would not be then guided by the directives of the center. Next is, it would provide a check and balance system, and again, it would basically make sure that the exercise of the power and authority is within the constitutional boundaries. Next is, the impeachment process can be similar to that of the president. Now, there have been certain committees and commissions. These are really important when we talk about the center-state relations from the angle of the office of the governor. So these are really important. The very first is Sarkaria Commission. Now, again, a lot of reform measures, recommendations have been given by these commissions and committee. What Sarkaria Commission said was that there has to be a proper consultation with the chief minister before you are appointing a governor, right? But in many cases, we have seen that this condition has not been followed. Again, arbitrary appointments have been made without the consultation process. A person of eminence in some field of public life. See, what we are saying is that you are appointing a person as the constitutional head of a state. So that particular person should be a person of eminence in the public affairs, or a person who has significant administrative experience. That person should not be a political figure, right? So that person can basically fulfill the selfish motives of the union government. That should not happen. The person should ideally be a person who has good knowledge of the administration, who has good knowledge of facilitating the interaction between the center and the states. Cannot be removed before the completion of his term, act as a bridge between the center and the state, again to facilitate the interactions, exercise his discretionary powers sparingly and judiciously. Very important. What we are now witnessing is that the the governor is actually exercising in many of these states his discretionary power on a very frequent basis. See, again, discretionary powers are the ones which have to be used in those circumstances which warrant that, yes, right now this is the time to use these powers. But they are being frequently used, and they are actually being used in a way to curb the state government. Next is, we have the Venkatacharya Commission. Now, this is also known as the National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution. It said that the appointment of the governors should be entrusted to a committee consisting of the Prime Minister, the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, the Chief Minister, the Union Home Minister. So they should sit together and then decide who is going to be the governor. Next is, they should be allowed to complete their 5-year term unless they resign or are removed by the President. Central government should consult the Chief Minister, the same thing. Not interfere in the day-to-day administration. This is something which is very crucial. Right now, what we are witnessing is that even in the smallest of the things, the governor is interfering in the business of the state government. So this is something which is against the federal aspect. Should act as a friend, philosopher, and guide to the state government. Use these words in your answer, would enhance the credibility of your answer. Next is, we have the Punchi Commission. So the Punchi Commission said that we should delete this phrase, during the pleasure of the President. This is something which has made the central government to remove or transfer these governors at its own whims and fancies, arbitrarily, without a reason, right? Whenever the union government felt that a particular state government is not acting in a way which ideally, according to the political interests of the union government, it should do, then there have been instances where these governors have been removed arbitrarily. Governor should be removed only by a resolution of the state legislature, same thing. Now, here is a very important case. BP Singhal versus Union of India. Now, in this particular case, the Supreme Court said that the President can remove a governor at any time without assigning any reason. Again, it basically substantiated this particular aspect of during the pleasure of the President. But again, Supreme Court also clarified one thing very clearly, that there has to be, the process of removal should be made sure in such a way that it should not be based on arbitrary, capricious and unreasonable grounds, right? So you need to make sure that it is not arbitrary in nature. The removal is not something which is based on reasons which are unjustified and irrational. So again, what we see is definitely the office of the governor is of utmost constitutional importance. It is a very significant office. Primarily, the objective is to facilitate the interaction between the center and the states, should not be used as a political tool by the union government. So we should incorporate these suggestions which are given by various committees and commission and make sure that the office of the governor, which is a very sacrosanct position, its status is actually maintained and it tries to fulfill these two objectives. The first is to be a link and to make sure that the working of the state government is carried out within the overall constitutional boundaries. So that is it, what you need to know with respect to this article. Let's have a mains practice question. The question says, discuss the role of the governor in India in the context of federalism. How does the office balance its constitutional mandate with political influence? Critically analyze the recent instances where the governor's actions have led to debates over the scope of their powers. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. Now, coming to the simplified section, we have the first article which talks about the increasing maternal mortality ratio in the state of Kerala. Now, this is something for a state of Kerala which is quite confusing. So let's talk about the gist of the article. See, Kerala is a state which has implemented a lot of socio-economic policies. It has taken a lead in making sure that there are adequate family planning measures. And because of that, it has had good parameters when we talk about the education levels, the health levels, the parameters, the health parameters, or the fertility rates. Now, what we are witnessing is that because of the reduction in the fertility rates, the maternal mortality rates is climbing up. Now, see, it does not mean that more number of women are dying in Kerala. What it means is, see, maternal mortality rate, we'll also study what it means as a concept. It is basically as a proportion of 1 lakh live births. Now, if the denominator, that is the number of the live births, it is actually decreasing at a faster pace as compared to the numbers of women who are dying, right? So obviously it would lead to an increase in the maternal mortality rates. So this is what the article is talking about. Also, it tries to highlight the social aspect. That is, because of the migrations taking place from the states, because of the social norms being changed, there are delayed marriages which are taking place. So ultimately it is leading to lower births, right? And ultimately that has amounted to increasing the maternal mortality rates. Let's first talk about some of the very important concepts, and these can be really important for your prelims, so pay attention. So we have total fertility rate. Now it basically refers to the average number of children a woman would bear during her lifetime if she were to experience the current age specific fertility rates throughout her reproductive years, that is from 15 to 49 years of age. It basically indicates the population growth trends. According to the National Family Health Survey 5, the total fertility rate in the country is 2.0, and this is below the replacement level. Now, what is replacement level fertility? It basically is the total fertility rate at which the population exactly replaces itself from one generation to the next without talking about the migration aspect. In most countries, this level is considered to be 2.1 children per woman. Now, significance, it basically tries to talk about the stable population growth. Now, India has already achieved the total fertility rate of 2.0 according to the National Family Health Survey. Now, this indicates that the country has reached below the replacement level. Now, if you look at this particular infographic, you will see that we have certain states which still have a TFR which exceeds the replacement level. So, we have Bihar, we have Meghalaya, we have Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Manipur. So do remember these states. There can be a probable statement in the prelims that all states in India have their total fertility rates below the replacement level. So this is obviously not true, right? Now let's talk about what do we mean by infant mortality rate, the IMR. It basically refers to the number of deaths of infants under 1 year of age per 1,000 live births in a given year. What is the significance? Critical indicator of the healthcare quality, maternal health, and socio-economic development. As per the sample registration system, we have the India's IMR at 27 deaths per 1,000 live births, right? Let's talk about the maternal mortality rate, which is given in the particular topic. The maternal mortality ratio refers to the number of maternal deaths during the pregnancy or within 42 days of termination of pregnancy per 1 lakh live births. Now, please understand, that is what I was talking about. That if you have the denominator, which is talking about the 1,000 live births, if the denominator is basically reducing at a faster pace than the numerator, right? So obviously, this ultimately would correspond to a situation where the maternal mortality rates would seem to be high. But this is not a result of the more number of women who are actually dying, right? In the scenario of Kerala. What it reflects is the quality of the maternal health care services and access to emergency obstetrics care. Now, what is the current status? According to the special bulletin on the maternal mortality ratio, India's MMR stands at 97 deaths per 1 lakh live births. So do remember this. Now, here is basically an infographic which talks about different states. You can use this information in your mains answer. So if you talk about the infant mortality rate, the first picture is basically sourced from the Reserve Bank of India. Now, we have certain states where the IMR rates are quite high, be it Madhya Pradesh or be it Uttar Pradesh, be it Chhattisgarh or Odisha. Do remember these states. Then we have maternal mortality ratio, right? Now, this is provided by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Says that we have high maternal mortality rates in the state of Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, and we have the eastern states also. Just have a glimpse through it. Can be used in your mains answer. Now, let's talk about this article, read it and understand. So we have Kerala's maternal mortality ratio, the lowest in the country at 19 per 1 lakh of live births, is now climbing steadily. The increase may be beyond the control of the officials. The latest sample registration system on maternal mortality of India, which was for the time period 18 and 20, brought out by the Register General of India, put Kerala's MMR at 19. So this was 19 as per 2018 and 20 data. Except during the 2021 period when Kerala lost many women due to COVID-19 during the pregnancy and childbirth, the state had consistently held a firm grip over the maternal mortality. Ironically, the current spike is not because of more women are dying, but because there are fewer childbirths than ever in the state. The state now has hit a low of around 3.9 lakh births from an average of 5 to 5.5 lakh births annually. Data from the economics department of the state says it is this dip in the denominator that is pushing the MMR up and not necessarily the actual spikes in the maternal deaths. The decline in the fertility levels and changing demographics, many fear, are having irrevocable impact on the state's social fabric and have been at the heart of many policy level discussions in Kerala. Next aspect is, as a part of sustainable development goals, Kerala has been implementing various policies. Kerala was targeting the MMR of 20 by 2030, but do you think it's really possible as of now? Because we are having lower live births. So obviously the MMR would increase, right? However, that looks quite unlikely now, given that the birth rates are falling steeply. Now, this would correspond to a situation where by 2024-25, the MMR would climb to almost 32 for this particular state. The issues that are impacting the state's MMR are not something essentially within our control. Seeing the impact of demographic changes, like what are the demographic changes witnessed in Kerala? The first is low fertility rates. Then you have immigration and changing societal attitudes towards marriage and childbirth in Kerala are the factors. Kerala led the demographic transition in the south, attaining the replacement level fertility in the year 87-88. Can you just understand that Kerala implemented a lot of so many policies in place that it already attained the replacement level back then in 87 and 88. The replacement level fertility is the average number of children a woman needs to have to replace herself and her generation so that the population is stable. The state, now this data specifically can be important for those who are appearing for the Kerala State Services. But again, as an example, if there's a question which talks about what are the implications of focusing too much upon reducing the fertility rates, right? So over there, you can talk about these aspects. The state's total fertility rates went below the replacement level in 91, remained stagnant at 1.8, 1.7, touching 1.5 in 2020. The current TFR of Kerala is 1.46. A couple of reproductive age in Kerala, what it means is, can mostly have only one child and sometimes none. It is possible that the TFR will drop to 1.35. In the next 10 years, the proportion of elderly population in Kerala is expected to go above that of the children, and the magnitude of the issues related to the care and the welfare of this population is likely to overwhelm us. What we're trying to say is that if you'll have fewer childbirths, obviously it would lead to a situation where the number of the elderly population, the proportion of the elderly population would increase, and then the state would have to bear expenses related to the care for the elderly people, right? Not just dealing the birth rates, the state is also beginning to see the consequences of a higher age at marriage and delayed childbirth. The proportion of older mothers and increase in the pregnancy-related morbidities in this group and their reproductive health issues are emerging concerns. This is also one of the aspects. Because of the delayed marriages, what we are witnessing is more number of morbidities, more number of pregnancy-related deaths, right? So these are the social aspects. In the questions related to the population aspect, you can definitely mention these aspects, that we should not overemphasize upon this aspect of fertility control. Definitely, it should be within a limit, right? As what we talk about the replacement level. But if it goes below that, right, definitely it has its own consequences. This is what you need to know with respect to this article. Coming to the next article, it talks about the center's clearance for a particular oil and gas exploration project in a particular eco-sensitive zone, which is related to a wildlife sanctuary in Assam. Now, see why this article becomes important, and I'm telling you this is really very important because it talks about three bodies. The first is National Board of Wildlife. The second thing is the Standing Committee of National Board of Wildlife. And the third is the Forest Advisory Committee. So the very objective, my objective would be to make you aware with respect to these three bodies, very important, right? So as the article says, that the Center's Wildlife Panel has approved a proposal to carry out oil and gas exploration in the eco-sensitive zone of the Holongopur, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, Gibbon Wildlife Sanctuary in Assam's Jorhat district. The Standing Committee of the National Board of Wildlife, chaired by the Union Environment Minister. Again, the Standing Committee, as it says, now these are the areas where the UPSC tries to exploit, right? It might ask a question. The Standing Committee of the National Board of Wildlife is chaired by the Prime Minister, right? So the correct answer is the Union Environment Minister. Approved the proposal by the Vedanta Group Scan Oil and Gas. The Forest Advisory Committee of the Union Environment Ministry had also granted in principle approval. Now, therefore, this body becomes really important. Please do pay attention. Now, the National Board of Wildlife is a statutory body, do remember, right? Established under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. What is a very objective? To promote the wildlife conservation and ensure the protection of ecological diversity. Statutory body and to promote the conservation status. Now, chairperson is the Prime Minister of India. Again, I'm saying the chairman of the National Board of Wildlife is the Prime Minister. The vice chairperson is the Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Members are 47, who includes 19 ex-officio members from relevant ministries, departments, then 10 expert members from the wildlife areas, conservation areas, 5 NGOs with expertise in the wildlife conservation, and then 13 state representatives nominated by the central government. What are the basically functions? To approve and review the wildlife conservation projects, to provide policy guidance on wildlife-related matters, advise the government on the establishment and management of protected areas, evaluate and make recommendations on projects requiring the diversion of forest land within the protected areas. Now, next is the Standing Committee of National Board of Wildlife. We talked about the National Board of Wildlife, now the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee of the National Board of Wildlife is a smaller decision-making body of the National Board of Wildlife, constituted to facilitate speedy processing of wildlife-related proposals. This is what the article also talks about, the speedy approval of these projects. Chairperson, the Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Members, selected members from the National Board of Wildlife, wildlife experts and representatives from the NGOs. Functions, to grant or deny clearances to projects in and around protected areas like wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, review the implementation of the wildlife conservation policies, ensure a compliance with the conditions imposed during project clearances. Just remember the functions. Criticism, as being observed in this particular case, often accused of fast-tracking the development projects without adequately considering the ecological considerations. So we have to also go with the proper impact assessment. But again, what this particular body is doing is it is fast-tracking the approval. So this is something which is against the environment conservation. Then we have Forest Advisory Committee. Now this is again a statutory body. Do remember, under the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, evaluates the projects that involve the diversion of forest land for non-forest purposes, such as mining, industry, and infrastructure. Constitution, if we talk about, formed under Section 3 of the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, remember, statutory body. Chairperson, Additional Director General of Forest, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. This person is primarily from the Indian Forest Service. Officials from the Ministry of Environment, independent experts in the forestry. What are the functions? Scrutinizes the proposals on forest land diversions and recommend the approval. Next is advise the government on matters related to the forest conservation. Monitor and review the compliance which is being mandated, right? Ensure that the compensatory afforestation and wildlife mitigation measures are implemented. What are the different stages? So we have the stage 1 clearance where conditional approval within stipulations are given. Then we have stage 2 clearances, final approval granted after the compliance with stage 1 condition. Again, the same criticisms, perceived leniency in granting the clearances to large scale projects. Next is alleged underestimation of the ecological impact of projects. So this is, you should know, because any question can be framed with respect to National Board of Wildlife or the Standing Committee or the Forest Advisory Committee. That is it, what you need to know with respect to this article. Now coming to the next article, this is with respect to the small language models. See, the article basically talks about the working of the artificial intelligence. Now this we actually discussed a few days back also. Now, see, as I discussed earlier, the concept, the very working of the artificial intelligence is based upon machine learning, right? Where the machine learning incorporates a language model. That is a series of steps, the algorithms which are performed by the machine, the data is fed in, the processing takes place, and ultimately the machine gives us a response. When you have these language models, now what are language models? They basically predict the sequence of a sentence, right? They're predictive models. When you have these language models which become quite big and advanced, we call them the large language models. Now, why large language models are important is, see, we have artificial intelligence and then we have artificial general intelligence, the final frontier of artificial intelligence, that is, which would be in a position to solve almost all the problems. But now what we are actually seeing in this particular article is that the article has tried to emphasize the importance of small language models, not large language models. See, there are certain tasks which are related to specific sectors. Now, if I don't want a system which talks about everything, if I just want a system which talks about a particular sector, which works in a specific field, then definitely small language models would be important because they would take less time to process the data and then they would come with the desired result. So that is what the article is talking about, the importance of small language models. Let's read this. The language models, so they are statistical or machine learning models that are trained to predict the probability of the sequence of the words or to generate the text based on given input. What are the key features? So we have, it can be used for text understanding, learning patterns, text generation, or application. They are primarily used in the chatbots. Once you have these advanced functions, advanced level of language models, we call them large language models. They're the subset of language models trained on massive data sets using advanced machine learning architectures like transformers. The techniques which are used in machine learning, they're basically known as transformers to understand and generate the human-like texts. Now, again, used in various applications. You have the ChatGPT, right, where generative pre-trained transformers. So over there, we are using large language models. Now, let's talk about why these small language models are important. The race towards building large AI models has been building up ever since OpenAI came up with the GPT-3, which actually used 175 billion parameters of LLMs. In the next 3 years, the company came up with GPT-4, which basically was trained on 1.7 trillion parameters, right? In 24, the researchers started to look at a language model differently, as scaling the training data source from the internet was giving marginal gains. Again, the processing using the large language models it's quite intensive, right? It requires a lot of time. So we need to look for other alternatives. The idea of building these small language models then came up. Google is now focusing, we have different enterprises, be it the Google. Now the Google is coming, Google's DeepMind has released Gemini Ultra. You already know about Gemini. Now it has come with Gemini Ultra, right? OpenAI and Meta launched their GPT-4o Mini and Llama 3 models. What are the pros and cons of the small language models? See, the small language models are cheaper and ideal for specific use cases. That is what I told you. They can be used in specific areas. For a company that needs artificial intelligence for a set of specialized tasks, a large AI model is not really required. Training these small modules require less time, less computing capacity, smaller training data, right? Obviously, then it would give the desired result in a faster manner. French startup Mistral AI and small language model provider pitched its AI model to be as efficient as large language models for specialized focused applications. Microsoft released a family of small language models called Phi, right? There have been instances where the UPSC has asked these things. The term Phi is related to which of the following technologies, right? So do pay attention. Apple Intelligence, we all are aware, iPhone 16, right? The AI system deployed in the latest iPhones and iPads runs on the AI models that can sort of match the performance of the top LLMs. If the LLMs are built to achieve the artificial general intelligence, which we just talked about, the final frontier of artificial intelligence, which can basically solve all the tasks, the small language models are made for specific use cases. How does it work for India? In a country like India, where the scope of AI adoption is immense, but resources are constrained, the diminutiveness of small language models is perfect. We have less resources. Now, small language models definitely require less resource to be built. So definitely this is something which is really good for India, right? Another AI initiative from the IIIT Hyderabad, Viswam, is building datasets from the ground to build the small language models that can be used in healthcare, agriculture, education, and promote and preserve the language and cultural diversity through the artificial intelligence. Important can be asked in the prelims. Just look at this. If you want to have a comparative analysis, we have the large language model and the small language model. The cost is very high for the large. It's low for the small. So that's the reason it's good for India. Then best for complex tasks, multi-language. Then routine tasks, basic content. Scalability can be moderate, and the scalability of large language model can be very high. This is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Coming to the next article, this is with respect to the ongoing debate, that is whether the voter ID should be linked with Aadhar or not. Let's talk about the gist of the article. The gist is that we have the electoral roll, which talks about the list of the eligible voters, right? Now, there have been the persistent issue of the duplication of votes or the manipulation of these voters. Primarily, as we are seeing in this particular article, we have Aam Aadmi Party or the BJP accusing each other of manipulating the voter data. Now, in order to basically resolve this conflict, this situation, the Election Commission of India came up with a solution that the voter IDs can be linked with Aadhar, so that we can have a robust electoral roll where there is no duplication, right? But again, on one side, this is fine. But on the other, if you talk about the linkage of Aadhar data with the electoral roll, it has a lot of implications. For example, the privacy aspect. So the Aadhar has detail with respect to the biometric of a particular person. Now, this is something which is really concerning. Next is that particular data is used by a lot of political parties. Now, if the Aadhar is linked to the voter IDs, then that can be basically exploited by different political parties. So this is the overall gist. You will see what are the benefits and what can be the way forward, right? So we have the different parties, Aam Aadmi Party and the Bharatiya Janata Party, have accused each other of manipulating the electoral rolls. Before the Delhi Assembly elections, the debate about linking the voter IDs, what we call as the Electoral Photo Identity Card, EPICs, with respective Aadhar numbers. Now, the Election Commission of India in February 2015, very good article, very simplified version. It would give you the whole chronology of how the events actually transpired. Launched the National Electoral Roll Purification and Authentication Program. This was, the very objective was to address the issue of duplicate entries in the electoral roll and to remove such entries. The Election Commission began authenticating the EPIC data by linking it with the Aadhar database. It linked more than 30 crore voters, right, in a span of 3 months. However, the Supreme Court in an interim order in August 2015 held that the mandatory use of Aadhar should only be for welfare schemes and personal account number, that is PAN card linking, right? So this particular exercise was discontinued. After the Supreme Court's final order in the Puttaswamy, so we had the particular judgment which actually talked about right to privacy being an integral part of right to life and personal liberty under Article 21. In September 2018, that upheld the constitutional validity of the Aadhar Act. The Election Commission sought the amendments to the Representation of People's Act 1950, which talks about the electoral rolls. The Parliament amended the Representation of People's Act 1950 and the Registration of Electoral Rules 1960 in December 21 to enable the linking of the EPIC electoral photo identity card with Aadhar. It provided the format in which the Aadhar information may be submitted. So it had basically two forms, Form 6 to establish the identity and Form 6B for the purpose of authentication. Any listed document may be submitted only if the voter is unable to furnish their Aadhar number because they do not have one. However, in order to keep these amendments voluntary in nature, the word may have been used in the amendments. Further, the amendment also specifies that no application for the inclusion of name in the electoral roll shall be denied and no entries shall be deleted due to the inability of an individual to furnish or intimate the Aadhar number due to sufficient cause. Again, what it's trying to say is it is not mandatory that you have to submit because Supreme Court already clarified it. Such individuals may furnish alternate documents like PAN card, driving license, passport, and bank passbook. Now, the Election Commission in September 2023 informed the court that submission of the Aadhar number is not mandatory. Now, the electoral photo identity card linkage with the respective Aadhar card would definitely help in weeding out duplicate entries that we have already discussed. That is essential. At present, more than 65 crore Aadhar numbers have already been uploaded in the process of finalizing the electoral rolls. There are some concerns about this exercise. What are the concerns? The very first is the errors in the Aadhar database. However minuscule, may result in wrongful rejection or deletion of the entries from the electoral roll. So what we are trying to say is that the data in the Aadhar is obviously not foolproof. There are issues in the data itself. Now, if you link the Aadhar data with the EPIC, definitely it can have consequences on the electoral participation. Secondly, the Aadhar is only a proof of residence and not a proof of citizenship. Remember, can be asked in a prelim statement. Thus, it may not help in removing the voters who are not citizens from the electoral roll. It would require a separate effort from the Election Commission. Finally, while the linkage is to happen at the back end and a mere mention of the Aadhar number on the electoral card may not by itself be a violation of the right to privacy, it may still result in the misuse of the electoral roll, which is actually widely circulated among the political parties. So if the political parties by chance get the access to these details, it might lead to the exploitation of the voters. What should be the way forward? The right to vote is a constitutional right. Tell me the article under which the right to vote is a constitutional right. And declared so by the Supreme Court in various cases. It is also a part of the basic structure of free and fair elections. So we had the famous case of Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narayan, where the Supreme Court clarified that free and fair elections is a part of the basic structure, right? And cannot be constructed through the legislative actions. There must be a wide publicity about the benefits of linking the EPIC and Aadhar to clean up the electoral roll of duplicate entries, which in turn strengthen the electoral process. Any misplaced concern among the most voters about the secrecy of their vote being compromised because of this linking should be assuaged. People should be made, they should be told that we will not basically exploit your personal details and there would be complete secrecy of your vote. Meanwhile, the forms should be suitably modified to reflect that providing Aadhar is not mandatory as per the submission of the Election Commission in the Supreme Court in September 2023. So that is what you have to understand, that again, it has its own benefit, the linkage, but again, there are certain issues which have to be basically handled by the government so that the people in the end have this feeling that yes, my vote is completely under overall secrecy and there would be no effect upon the overall voter participation. That is it, what you have to understand with respect to this particular article. Now coming to the last article of the day, this talks about the appointment of the vice chancellors in the state universities. Now we have already talked about a lot in the role of the governor. Now over here also we have this particular office, the governor, which is important. Now we have the UGC which has come up with its draft rules for the appointment of the vice chancellors in the state university. Now, it has given a bigger role to the chancellor of the state universities, who is actually the governor of a particular state. Now, this is being seen by different state governments as something which is negating the principle of the federalism, right? So we'll see what these guidelines are, what is the process of appointment, and what different states have done to basically counter this tendency. See, we have several states have objected to the provisions in the UGC regulations of 25 that could give the chancellor, who is typically the state governor, a bigger role in the appointment of the vice chancellors of the state universities. Remember, the chancellor in a state university is the governor. Now, how are the vice chancellors appointed? So we have the regulations notified by the UGC in 2018, which say that a search cum selection committee comprising of the eminent persons in the higher education shall shortlist 3 to 5 candidates by public notification, nomination, a talent search process, or a combination of these processes. The chancellor or the visitor in a central university, who is actually the president, the visitor is the president for a central university, appoints a vice chancellor from amongst the recommended names. In case of a state and a private university, one member of the committee is nominated by the UGC chairman. For state universities, the rest of the committee is constituted accordance with a state law. In the case of central universities, which are established under the Act of Parliament, for example, we have the JNU or the Delhi University, the visitor, their ceremonial head, is the President of India. The composition of the committee to appoint the VC of a central university is determined by the act that governs that particular university. For example, we have University of Delhi and Jawaharlal Nehru University. Over the past several years, non-BJP ruled governments in different states have clashed with the governor, who is a nominee of the center, over the appointments of the vice chancellors. In Kerala, what was the case? So in 2023, the assembly passed a bill to replace the governor with the eminent educationists as the chancellors of the universities. What was the case in West Bengal? The West Bengal Assembly passed the University Laws Bill 2023 to replace the governor with the chief minister as the chancellor of the state-aided universities. In Karnataka, the same thing happened in December 24. Observe that all these states are opposition-ruled states, right? In December 24, the Assembly passed a bill to replace the governor with the chief minister as the chancellor of the Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayati Raj University. In Maharashtra in 21, when you had the Uddhav Thackeray's government, the Maha Vikas Aghadi government was in power, the legislature passed a bill that basically restricted the governor's power to only approving the VC candidates recommended by the state government. Then in Tamil Nadu in 22, the DMK-led government passed 2 bills to allow the state government to pick vice chancellors for state universities, but these bills were not approved by the governor. What are the new regulations by the UGC? So the draft rules say, these are the draft rules. The chancellor or the visitor shall constitute the search cum selection committee comprising 3 experts. The 2018 regulations did not specify who would constitute the committee. So right now, it is being emphasized that the chancellor or the visitor shall basically constitute the search cum selection committee. The new regulations specify the composition of the committee, a member each nominated by the visitor or the chancellor, the UGC chairman, and the apex body of the university. It can be the executive council or the senate. This gives the nominees of the center the majority. So once the center would have the majority, obviously it would be against the principles of the federalism, what the different states are also talking about. Besides professors, individuals at senior levels in the industry, public policy, public administration, public sector undertakings can also become the vice chancellors, right? So it has enhanced the scope of those persons who are basically eligible to become the vice chancellors. Questions of federalism. So we have the Kerala's chief minister said that the draft regulations undermine the federalism by stripping the states of their rights to appoint vice chancellors and vest unchecked power in the chancellor. Tamil Nadu Assembly has asked the center to withdraw the draft regulations. The chief minister has said that the governor's broader control over the VC appointments is a direct assault on federalism and state rights. You can use these instances while you're writing a particular answer with respect to the office of the governor or the center-state relations. UGC chairman has then basically assuaged and said that these draft rules seek to provide a robust process for selecting the vice chancellors, aligning with the overarching goals of quality and transparency in the higher education, and it is also aligned with the national education policy of 2020. Now, I have one specific information which I found really relevant and important for you. So that's the reason I have added it. So we have the mention of the state of Kutch in the Indian Express in the World Affairs section. So just know that we have the state of Kutch here, which basically separates the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, right? It's near the Crimean Peninsula. And then we also have here the Bosphorus Strait, separates the Black Sea with the Sea of Marmara. And then we have the Dardanelles Strait, which separates the Aegean Sea with that of the Sea of Marmara. This location is really important, and always West Asia and Middle East has always been important for the UPSC, right? So this part becomes really important. The countries of Russia, what is happening all around, right? So we have, just remember, the Strait of Kerch, we have Bosphorus, and we have the Dardanelles, right? Just remember, Sea of Azov, Black Sea, Sea of Marmara, and Aegean Sea. That is it for today. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the best. Let us know through your likes and comments. Thank you so much.